So that's the first thing. The second thing you need to do is find a recurring problem to solve. Okay, good ideas don't make good businesses. Solving problems makes good businesses. So once you figure out, you know what, I'm a social entrepreneur, I want to drive social impact. Let me find then a social problem that's recurring that I can solve in return for money.
Hello and welcome to Entrepreneurs Talk Africa, the podcast of African entrepreneurs. I am Marc Israel, founder, CEO, startup coach, university lecturer, engineer, and human being. And I had the pleasure of being your host for this episode of ETA. Today, we're welcoming a serial entrepreneur and an author, Sandiso Ncube. Sandiso is an SME growth facilitator, has helped more than 20 businesses grow triple digit. Yeah, you heard it well, triple digit over the last 2 years. And he's also the author of the 10-minute guide to starting a business. Sandiso, thank you very much for joining us. How are you doing?
Good, Mark. Thank you for having me.
All right, it's a pleasure. Cool. Pleasure is shared. So before we deep dive into our topic today, I would like really to plan the decor for the audience. And can you tell us a little bit more about you and your entrepreneurship story?
Yeah, so, my entrepreneurship story really started when I think I was 10 years old or so. So, wow. Yeah, it started when I was 9. So what happened there, it's, sort of the typical entrepreneur story. Myself and my brother wanted pocket money. So we kept bothering our parents about it. So my mom was like, okay, so I'm going to buy you some candy. You sell it at school. So we did that for about a few months. And because we'd never really had pocket money until that time, we didn't know what to do with the money. So we just wasted it. We played games with it, bought food, friends' food at school, and just generally just gave it away and became a nuisance of it, right? So about a year later, when I turned 10, we were watching the Freedom Day celebrations, the South African Freedom Day celebrations. And I said to my mom, so Mom, is South Africa really free? Just based on what was happening on television. And my mom said, you are never really free until you own the means of production. So I said, okay, so what are the means of production? She said, at the time, of course, land and machinery. And I said, okay. So how do I own the means of production? And she said, you become an entrepreneur. And I said, okay. And so what's an entrepreneur? Well, what you did last year when you were selling sweets at school to make your money, that's an entrepreneur. So I've been obsessed with entrepreneurship since then. And my initial idea was to actually leave high school and go straight to entrepreneurship or the army, one of those two things. But my parents would have none of that because they wanted me to go to university, which... university for me was complete torture because all I kept thinking about was just getting out of there and starting a business, doing something. So one of the troubles I had at university was I studied genetics, but I wanted to work in banking. So
interesting.
I just couldn't figure it out, right? I couldn't figure out how to transition. So I started doing a lot of research in university about how to do that transition, and there was nothing really helpful. So I made myself a promise. So I said, I'm going to work in corporate for 3 years after varsity. Once I've done that, I'm going to put together something to help other kids transition as well, if they want to make the jump across sort of studying in a different field of work. So I did exactly that. After 3 years of working, I resigned. Great job in banking. I enjoyed it. But something was just calling me. So I resigned and I spent 18 months developing a graduate preparation program. And so what I'd done in university was I'd worked for a university society where we did second language debate training for schools. So schools that did English second language, we taught them how to debate. And for 2.5 years, I led a team and we did training for kids who came in not knowing how to put together a sentence in English to becoming fully fledged debaters in English. Very confident, very able to speak in public and in private and sort of defend their point of view. And when you do something that has impact, that changes people's lives at that scale, it changes you and that feeling becomes addictive. Just seeing change in human beings and people at that scale. So I wanted to replicate that in my entrepreneurship journey. So I started building this this program, spent 18 months on it. And initially it was designed to be online.
Mm-hmm.
Then I did the research and found out that online at the time was prohibitively expensive. So I said, okay, let me see if I can roll it out via workshops. That seemed like a better option. But by the time I was ready to roll it out, I was tired, I was broke, and because then I was an ignorant and arrogant guy. You couldn't tell me anything. I wanted control of everything. So as opposed to finding people to collaborate with, I wanted to do everything myself. So eventually I hung up my boots and, got off the field. And that was my first experience with business failure. And from that point onward until 2015, when I wrote the initial book, I tried my hand at small businesses, different things, because I just didn't have the heart to go after something big again. That had traumatized me. I still carry the scar of it. And so in 2015, I decided, okay, now I'm going to do something useful with myself. And I'm going to consult with startups and use the knowledge I gained in banking to help them build IT systems and that kind of thing. So what started to happen was I kept getting the same questions. The only thing people really wanted to know about was, how do I start a business? Where do I start? What makes a good business? How do I manage my money? Where do I get clients? How do I do my marketing? And these were all questions I struggled with previously.
Mm-hmm.
And at that point in time, in trying to get over my own trauma, I'd spoken to a number of entrepreneurs, both experienced and new. So I had those answers for myself. And because I kept getting, those questions, one day out of frustration, I decided, you know what, screw this. So excuse my language. So I said, you know what, out of frustration, screw this.
Yeah.
I'm going to write all of these answers on a PowerPoint. So every time someone says to me, ask me any one of these questions, I'm just going to send them the PowerPoint and tell them to get away from me.
Yeah.
Kind of thing. What started out as a PowerPoint turned into a book, essentially. And that entire process was a healing process for me.
Mm-hmm.
Because I'd done so many things, most of which had failed, by the way. And I just couldn't reconcile it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I was a fairly smart guy, fairly educated, work experience. I just couldn't figure it out. So when I got to the point, I said to myself, you know what? If I have these questions, all these people have these questions, and I've got a set of answers that I've uncovered, let me just write this as a book and see what happens. And what I thought was the middle of my entrepreneurship journey was actually the very beginning. Because it was through writing the book that I realized that I didn't know as much as I thought I did.
Yeah, that's generally the process when you write the book. Yeah.
Indeed. And that, that was the beginning of, I was at the beginning of the beginning. And I needed to learn what I didn't know. And then once I knew what I didn't know, then the process would actually really begin. So that's the long and short of it is.
I know it's
it all started.
It's a wonderful story that started a long time ago. It's funny because so you sold sweets. I sold pastries as well when I was in high school. So basically, that was that kind of thing. So I went to the bakery next door and purchased a couple of things and went back to the school and selling them. So yeah, it's the way that kids learn a little bit or make their first experience generally. So as you said, so you described the whole lengthy process that led to this book, the 10-minute guide of starting a business. So what could your readers really expect from the book? Because 10 minutes is very short, actually.
Yes. So one of the frustrating things part of why I'd failed so many times was I just couldn't bring myself to read. So there were books on entrepreneurship, and there still are.
Yeah.
But most of them are about 200-300 pages. Okay. And when you're executing or trying to execute, you don't have time to sit through 300 pages to figure out what you're doing right or what you're doing wrong or what needs to be done. So I said to myself, okay, how do I get people to pay attention to this material? What would I appreciate? I'd appreciate something that's simple, straight to the point, something I don't have to try and interpret. If the sentence is one way, it should mean exactly what the sentence says. And so readers can expect something simple, something straightforward, something action-based. Because it's absolutely worthless to entrepreneurs if people can't follow what you say to get to the point that they need to get to. So simple, straightforward, action-based.
Nice. So it's so basically the opposite of those many management books or leadership books that are wordy, that says 20 times the same thing over 30 pages and 12 chapters. Generally, it's just, you take one or two ideas out of those 300 pages. So here it's your goal is different. So, and so maybe that explains, or the way that you approach this endeavor explains your success, even though you mentioned you had failures, but the success in helping other business grow. So, and that's always something that, and we've discussed that with many other entrepreneurs as well. Growth is always something, particularly in the startup world, where if you're not growing triple digit every year, you're not growing. It's kind of crazy. But in your opinion, and because you did that for 20 plus businesses, so what is there a secret sauce to growth?
Yeah, so there definitely is a secret sauce to growth.
Great. I want to hear
it. So, there's three primary things. So number one is figure out the kind of entrepreneur you are. Okay. Because that influences how you approach entrepreneurship and how much you're willing to do and what you're willing to do.
Okay.
So that's the first thing. The second thing you need to do is find a recurring problem to solve. Okay. Good ideas don't make good businesses. Solving problems makes good businesses. So once you figure out, you know what, I'm a social entrepreneur. I want to drive social impact. Let me find then a social problem that's recurring that I can solve in return for money. Third thing is, and the most important thing is, get your pricing right. Because if you don't get your pricing right, no matter how much volume you do, no matter how many sales you do, you're not going to grow. It's as simple as that. And the way you get your price, and the way to get your pricing right is to say, okay, what is this problem worth to the customer, to the person that has it? How painful is it? So if you find someone for whom the problem is excruciatingly painful, they're going to be willing to pay you a higher price than for someone to whom that problem isn't as painful. So the trick with entrepreneurship is always finding a problem to solve and selling your solution to the person that feels the most pain from that problem, right? That way, you're priced healthily, your margins are good. So as the volume of sales increases, you're able to save more money, you're able to generate enough money to pay yourself and your employees, but you're also able to generate enough money to reinvest in the business. So at a very basic level, Mark, those are the three things that people need to get right. So
that's the three ingredients to that sauce that I was thinking about.
Yes.
It's interesting. So maybe I want to spend a couple more minutes here, because it's when I'm coaching startups, actually, it's always a difficult conversation. What I mean by difficult is people struggle coming up with a pricing strategy that is aligned with a growth P&L, a growth strategy as well, and those kind of things. So I hear you when you say, well, you need to come up with the right pricing for your right niche or market that you are aiming at. But what would be in your mind and in your experience the best way really to say, hey, I'm going to sell my product, 200 Rand or 100,000 Rand or whatever the amount, but in that specific set of customers that have that specific set of problems that I can solve, what is the magic number? So how do you come to that magic number?
Okay, so that's a great question. So the first thing you have to figure out is what's your break-even number in terms of volume. Okay. So the way it works is, let's take a step back. You are either in one of two types of businesses. You are either in the volume business, i.e., you've got to sell a certain number of items for you to break even, or you are in the value business, i.e., you sell low volumes, high value.
Okay.
So you have got to figure out where you fall in. But in both of those instances, there's a break-even value that's aligned to the cost of setting up and running your business on a day-to-day basis. Now, that value, let's say, is $1,000. So it's going to cost you $1,000 to run your business month on month. That means your break-even value is $1,000. So you've got to sell whatever it is you're selling to, number one, make sure you have $1,000 in income to cover your break-even number. And then any value after then that goes towards your profitability. So the magic number has to be the number that covers your break-even costs. If you are not covering your costs, you're not going to win this game.
I love it, and it's I got two things actually two ideas coming in my mind. The first idea is, and I love the way that you approach it, is, well, you need to know the break-even number. And to me, when I say you need to know the break-even, that means that you need to have a P&L, even though you have not sold anything, even though you haven't even started the business. Well, you need to have a P&L, okay?
Yes.
And the first thing that generally startups tell me, or entrepreneurs or wannabe entrepreneurs tell me, says, yeah, but what the purpose of having a P&L? Because anyway, I will never make that amount of sales, or I will never spend that amount of money. It's all projections that I read in many books that says, well, anything that you put on paper anyway will never happen, because something will happen, and the whole numbers are completely wrong. And I said, yeah, that's true. But at the same time, if you don't do that exercise, you don't even know how to measure what you're doing. And so I love this thing about just knowing the break even and just measuring exactly, knowing the exact number. That's a question actually I'm asking to the guys as well, is and generally they look at me and says, so what is your runway? How long can you survive without making a sale? Yeah, so it gets me, well, I don't know, I can survive a long time. So no, I'm not asking you for a long time. I said, how many weeks, days, month, whatever? I can do 6 months. Okay. So you have enough money on your bank account, in your personal bank account, to survive for 6 months before something bad happens.
Yes.
And then when they start to realize that, say, okay, let's do the P&L exercise. So I love this idea, and I think that the point that you're making as well on the value and volume is very relevant. Which market do you want to play in? That makes a very, very valid point. Now, so of course, if you got your strategy, you know which entrepreneur you are, you know the pricing strategy, so you know exactly now how you're going to run that business, or you have a good idea, or fairly good idea. So anything that you've seen, or any, I would say, what I call dangerous milestones, so the pothole that you have not forecasted, that entrepreneurs need to be aware of, they need to keep an eye on, in your experience?
Oof, there are so many.
Oh man, that seems depressing.
But there are so many, but there are about 3 or 4 that are key.
Okay.
Right. So
nice.
Being an entrepreneur is a lot like being in an MMA fight.
Okay.
Right. you've always got to try and avoid the knockout punch. So the knockout punch for entrepreneurs is number one, losing sight of your customer needs. So what happens is, as we become profitable, as we grow, we start to believe our own hype and we lose sight of what our customers need.
True.
And so the more we grow, the less and less we serve our customer needs, and then we start to lose customers. So that's number one. The second thing is we hire the wrong people that start to poison the way we work. And that second thing is probably one of the highest killers of small businesses. Is we're growing so quickly. We want someone to come in and we look at LinkedIn, for instance, and we look for the guy with the most impressive credentials and we bring them on board. But this guy, as a human being, is terrible. No empathy, no patience, a lack of understanding. You know what I'm saying? Doesn't work. Only shows up when they want to because they feel they're a professional, they've earned their leisure. And so
funny, it seems like you know who we hired. Man, you know the guys. Oh, shit.
So and the third thing is going after big clients. So what we often do is when we do P&Ls, one of the most exciting things to put in a P&L is, high volumes because you're selling to a Microsoft, because you're selling to an IBM or a Google or what have you. It's exciting. But here's what happens with big corporate clients is they usually pay after 60 to 90 days. They usually require lots of compliance. They usually have very strict ways in which they want you to do business with them. So it means as a small business, when you need to get in money every single day, you're only getting in money every 60 to 90 days.
Correct.
The problem is you may not survive that long. So if you focus on getting big customers, you've got to have enough money in the bank account. However, if you want to be in it for the long haul, focus on cash customers, right? So it's number one, we lose sight of our customer problems. We hire the wrong people. We chase after the wrong clients. Cash customers keep our doors open. They keep us moving day to day.
And it goes back actually, and I think that makes perfect sense. It goes back to your previous point on, on knowing when and where to break even. It's
yes.
It's funny because so being born French and my first company was made in France, and when you ask an accountant what are the biggest important numbers and sheets and everything, and he will always tell you P&L and P&L and P&L and P&L because he's an accountant.
Yes.
As an entrepreneur, yes, P&L, and we talked briefly about it, is critical, that's for sure. But the most critical spreadsheet is the cash flow statement.
100%. 100%.
Cash is king.
That is your oxygen.
Yeah.
No business can survive. You know what I think part of the problem is, Mark, is most of us bought into the Silicon Valley hype.
Yeah. Multiple $1 million.
Bootstrapping and all these fantastic ideas that only work in a crazy idealistic environment. But for most people, and you're right, it's that cash flow statement. It's making sure money comes in every day. It's making sure you use that money properly.
Yeah, no, I agree.
That's how you move forward.
Yeah. So there is a question that I love to ask as well to entrepreneurs, and particularly guys like you who coached and worked with a lot of companies. So in the investment world where I stepped in a year ago approximately, there is a kind of a saying that says, well, when you look at the team, at the founding team, generally one founder only is too few. We need somebody else to balance the founder. So we need at least 2 or 3 co-founders. 4 is too many because the guy will fight. So what's your experience there? Because I discovered generally, just to give you some context as well, that the investment world, and not only the Valley, but the investment world has a skewed view sometimes on what the reality of businesses are. So where do you find the right balance in the number of founders?
So, I think primarily the way the investment world looks at it is a risk mitigation strategy. So as an investor, you want to minimize your risk.
Yeah.
When you've only got one founder in the business you're investing in, that's high risk, because if anything happens to that person, you've potentially lost your entire investment.
Right.
In reality, however, there is no right answer for that question, because in reality, every single business is different. Every single circumstance is different. So the most sophisticated and the more complicated your business, you either need really good co-founders who can bring in what the business needs, or you need to hire very good people to bring in what the business needs. It's really about, what does the business need to get from point A to point B? So whether that's a founder or whether that's good employees, that's neither here nor there. It just has to depend on the business. Now, often what happens is, depending also on the environment that you work in, it's better in your first 3 years to be the only founder, because you can move quickly, make decisions, execute, deploy, organize. But it also means if you're a single founder, you've got to have a very strong personality.
Correct.
You've got to be very firm. If you know that you don't have a strong personality, then it's probably a good strategy to look for someone who's firm, who's strong, who can play the bad cop in the business. Because every single day in the week, at some point in the day, you're going to be the bad cop. You're going to have to be. So I think, part of the challenge with entrepreneurship and why so many of us fail is we are always looking for a one-size-fits-all answer.
Right.
As opposed to finding solutions for our specific problems. So there isn't a right answer for that question. It simply depends on what you need and the environment that you operate. And who you are, of course, as an entrepreneur.
It makes perfect sense, and the same thing I relate to my first company. So I've been founded with a friend of mine who is completely opposite, and he was a bean counter really, and I was not in the P&L, cash flow statement, those kind of things. So I was just out of my engineering school, so I was really in something else, and that guy was a bean counter, and so every time I wanted to make a purchase, the guy said to me, no. Says, why? No. it frustrated me. It says, and actually I thought about that as well. So while you were talking, and when was that, this morning or yesterday, I was watching quickly a small interview of Elon Musk. And amongst the advices that he was giving to entrepreneurs, the third one was, to me, the most striking, is that be open to criticism, particularly from your friends.
Yes.
And I thought about it. I understand that. And man, this is painful. This is awfully painful. Yes. But it's true that, well, if you accept, if you reflect, then that may be another ingredient, that the pepper or the chili in that sauce that makes it special.
But the ability to self-reflect and accept criticism, that's a game changer. When you realize that you don't know nearly enough of what you need to know to make your business successful, that's when things change. Because then you start saying, okay, maybe let me speak to Marc because he's a much better people person. Let me speak to Gerald because he's much better operationally. Let me hear what they have to say because they can move us forward. While there isn't, sort of like the perfect entrepreneur archetype, but there is a best entrepreneur. The best entrepreneurs are people who are really good at what they do. They are good at what they do because they recognize they can't do everything.
True.
And because they can't do everything, they're always willing to listen, always open to learning new things, and always willing to be taught something new, especially by the people they hire, right?
Yeah.
Because entrepreneurship and running a business is a lot like having a family. There's got to be trust. There's got to be, an openness. There's got to be sincerity. And if you think you know it all, well, my friend, good luck.
Yeah, that's actually, It's funny again. It reminds me the first company meeting while at Microsoft with Satya Nadella, where he tried to shift the culture of the company from know it all to learn it all, and to be really open to learning and taking the stance of how well we don't know what we don't know. So the more we learn, the more we absorb, the better we become. So yeah, I completely agree. So the sad thing about our discussion is that we're getting close to the end. It flew poof, like a dream. So very, very quickly.
2 questions and it's done.
Yeah, well, it's almost always like that. It's quite funny. But we have our signature question. So I want to close our discussion with that one question. What would be really your 3 pieces of advice to young, aspiring entrepreneurs, new entrepreneurs?
So that's a tough question. A tough question. So number 1 is know why you're doing it. So sometimes when you know why you're doing something, you understand how to navigate through it. What I've often seen happen with entrepreneurs is they start a business because they think it's exciting and they're young, they've got the energy, and then they get stuck. And then it's 30 years later and they hate their life. So know why you're doing it. Yeah. So that's number 1. Know why you're doing it. The second thing you need to do is think about an exit plan. Once you get to the point that you identified initially when you started, how are you going to exit?
Yeah.
And the third thing is find a recurring, painful problem to solve. Good ideas don't make good businesses at all. You can either go through your entrepreneurship journey with small wins and small successes, or, it can be like most of us, very painful, very traumatic, and you don't want anyone else to go through it again. So I think those would be my best pieces of advice for the entrepreneur.
And they make perfect sense. And I'm 100% with you on those ones. So thank you very much, Sandiso. Thanks to the audience who tuned up and listened to this episode. You have been listening to Entrepreneurs Talk Africa, the podcast for African entrepreneurs. I'm Marc Israel, co-founder and CEO of the Talk Collective, the company behind Entrepreneurs Talk Africa. And today we had the immense pleasure of hosting Sandiso Ncube, author of the 10-Minute Guide to Starting a Business. You will find references and links directly in the show notes, so you can have a look at the book and, of course, buy it or hire Sandiso if you want to grow triple-digit your business. So before our next episode, thanks for taking 10 seconds to leave us 5 stars on the podcast app you're using. It really helps. So thank you in advance and see you next week for more inspirations and actions from across the African continent.